Hey, I'm gonna make a quick video, a quick little theory video about equality versus fairness that I've actually wanted to do for a few weeks, but things kind of got in the way. So the other, like 3 weeks ago, I linked an article on Twitter about from Evonomics, and the article was basically arguing that like people care about equality, so people care about fairness more than they care about equality. And it was, it looked at some studies and it looked at like, examples of how children viewed these two things and how like small tribes did it. And it was pretty short. It didn't go that deep. And I linked it because I generally agree with the article. And what's funny is actually a conservative guy. I like the article, which I find amusing. But I want to talk about what I think, because I think there's some nuances that might be missed by the article. The problem is framing the debate as like equality versus fairness. Because what the article pretty much argues is that it's possible to get unfairness by focusing on equality. That is true. But the two concepts, it's not one versus the other in a straight, like, linear sense. You can have fairness and equality. You can have fairness and inequality. And this, at the same time, you can have unfairness and equality and unfairness and inequality. The two concepts don't really work like that. I think the difference is equality is more of sort of an analytical, objective, just measurement of what's already in the system. Like if two people have the same height, they are equal in terms of height. It's just matching up the parameters of different entities in a way that lines up. Fairness is a moral concept. Fairness has all this ethical normative force. Fairness is about right and wrong. Something is wrong if it's unfair, and it's right if it is fair, or it's actually good if it is fair. So there's already sort of a big difference. Equality by itself doesn't get into that. The thing is, people assume that it does. They'll assume that there's this one-to-one between fairness and equality. Things are more fair if they're more equal, or they're more fair if they're more unequal, and they just use that formula to achieve what they think fairness is. And those formulas are stupid. They're wrong. They're not the actual formula. There is no simple formula. There's no easy formula. Some would argue that there is no formula at all, or that every formula that exists is wrong, which I could sort of see, but it doesn't change that we sort of have to, like, the absurdity of it is that we still sort of need a formula. But that's besides the point. I've explained the concept. I think fairness has much more to do with value and what we think value is. And fairness is a sort of, it's us looking for a system of rules that maximizes the amount of value that the system creates, or that the system has. It maximizes the amount of value that our world generates by following specific rules. That's what fairness is for. Things are unfair in a sense. We feel that they're unfair, but the unfairness will lead to less value being created. That's sort of the idea. If you think of like a chess game, if one of the rules is the game produces the most value when it's fair, when we all play by the same rules, and the different games that emerge as a result of different choices and different skill. That's the part that's actually interesting. Therefore, that is the part that has value. It's not interesting when it becomes easy to predict, when you say, I can make twice the number of moves you can make. Then I have a cheat code and you don't. And you're playing it in hard mode, so it's, it makes everything much less interesting. Yeah. The other thing to note is that equality is one of these things where it's like equality always accompanies inequality in some form. If there's equality along one parameter, there's inequality along another. That's just how it works. It's like, stability is destabilizing. Equality is unequalizing. Once you make everybody the same height, you're just going to notice all the other differences. Once you make everybody, just as smart, you're going to notice all the other differences. Every difference becomes elevated in its value and its significance when we've achieved equality. That's not a bad thing, by the way. That's actually an important thing, because that's how we select for the games that we're trying to play, in life. That's how we choose and decide, the kinds of games that we play. Is that once we sort of establish equality, we immediately move on to the next game. where, or the next phase of the game where some other difference matters a lot more. I think the important thing with that is realizing that regardless of how equal or unequal you are, every attribute matters in a sense, in the sense that it could have a unique function within the system that has value, even though in ways that you wouldn't expect. And then you sort of need to look for that to make sure that every single individual has their ideal righteous role, so that everything is as efficient and as fair as possible. Because even if you make things equal, and then let's say we make everybody equally tall, but then we notice some people have better eyes, it's important to remember that whilst some of those things might seem more valuable than others, the things that make that other person, the things that make the person who's different might also have a value that we wouldn't necessarily assume or realize conventionally. In a way, conventionalism is another flaw with the system, is assuming that the convention tells us where the value is, which it doesn't always. That's the whole point of it. It's another cheat code, basically, to tell us what the value is. But yeah, I'm going to just talk about the left and the right. The left, they both use these concepts incorrectly. I think the left, again, assumes that equality is one-to-one with fairness, and that's just not it. As I explained, equality is this. There's no such thing as perfect equality. There's no such thing as perfect inequality, and nobody wants either of those things. The state of the world is constantly within this flux point between equality and inequality, and there's no way of getting out of that. So the left who use equality as a standard can be short-sighted, and the right, their problem is that they can be short-sighted as well, because they'll assume that the left only cares about equality, which isn't necessarily true. The left, as it's pursuing equality, is also in a way helping the system, because they're pursuing a different kind of game by doing that. If people stop competing for, basic needs and stop competing for just basic liquidity via basic income and competing to make sure that they can eat food and have health care, that opens up a completely different arena where, which is the arena that we're supposed to eventually get to, that's sort of the next step for humanity. Then the right just sort of can either ignore how that actually works, is you need that equalization to get to the next step. Otherwise, that next step won't be reached, because we're going to be stuck focusing on the other step. The other thing is, I feel like the right thinks the left, the right thinks that the left is ridiculous and only cares about equality, and by doing that, they completely forget that the concept matters whatsoever, which is just as bad. I think, based on what your theory of fairness is, you will expect to see certain forms of equality or inequality in the world, and you will pursue certain forms of equality and inequality. Based on my concept of fairness, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to pursue, things like universal health care and free tuition and basic income and stuff like that. Things that could basically equalize humanity at the bottom layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so we're no longer competing for resources, so that individuals are no longer competing for resources in that particular industrial sort of market-driven way. Individuals will still compete, they just won't compete for that. They'll compete for more artistic, creative, intellectual things, which is where the arena is rapidly moving to as a result of automation and stuff like that. And on top of that, all of humanity's challenges being sort of transplanted to the external, the getting off planet Earth, global warming, looking for alternate energy sources and all this stuff. You can't have an entire, you can't have a system that's just full of people doing the same shit that they always do with all of those incoming threats. No, we have to move on. We have to reorganize the entire system so it focuses more on that kind of heavy intellectual stuff to carry it through those kinds of problems. And, this goes into the whole complexity thing and the evolutionary zipper and all that shit that I've talked about for, years at this point. So you get the idea. Long story short, the left wants the naive left wants the game to be too easy. The right wants the game to be too hard. And the right doesn't realize that the game is already rigged, and some people are already playing with fucking cheat codes on, and the rest of us have to play it in fucking super hard mode, where, you know, the game was just designed to dick you and fuck you over. And it was designed with all these ridiculous spikes and all this bullshit that you can't even platform over. Like, who the fuck designed this game, honestly? Return this motherfucker and give an angry review on YouTube or some shit. Anywho, lastly, I'm going to get to personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is the thing... the reason I'm adding it into that, just because this, like, thought has been in my head for a while, and I want to sort of... I think it's sort of related to the fairness concept. How do you know that you're being fair or unfair? You know, usually it amounts to just doing. You know, if you do something unfair to a person, you're being unfair. But, you know, some people, you know, impact-oriented people will say that, no, it's not just about doing, it's about allowing. If you allow unfairness, you're also doing a bad thing. And I agree with that. And I would go even further than that and say that it's not even just about allowing. It's also about just having certain preferences and desires could contribute to you skewing the world in a direction where it could be more unfair if you're not mindful of it. You know, like being totally selfish in your own interests without viewing how they could skew the world could hurt it. For example, you know, having certain preferences. So you have to be mindful of that. And I can use myself as an example here. I work a very sort of traditional administrative businessy kind of job, and I wouldn't say that I enjoy doing it very much. It's not that it doesn't have any value or that it's had no value. As a completionist, obviously, doing a little bit of everything matters, but I think I've done enough of it that it's stopped mattering anymore. I wouldn't do it all day. I wouldn't do it every day. I wouldn't do it for more than a few months, honestly, in order to consider it complete. But I have to do it for a lot more, and I don't want to. I want to move on to other things. At the very least, I want to be an ethicist, if that isn't apparent to my viewers at this point. I want to be an ethicist, and that already sort of puts me in a different category within the system as a function. Very few people get to be ethicists, and, you know, ethicist is a sort of, it's a very unique kind of function to have, right? So the question is, am I screwing over people by wanting to have that unconventional sort of role? You know, because the people who do have to work that job, because regardless of whether I want to do it or not, other people also want to do it. So other people will still have to do it. And I do benefit from other people working those kinds of jobs, because those kind of jobs do keep a lot of society functioning to an extent. You know, it's not just the ethicists that keep society functioning. Obviously, I'm aware of that. So I have to be aware of the fact that other people have to do this thing. And I can't be so sort of closed-minded and have tunnel vision on my own interests without acknowledging the value that this has to have for other people, for them to enjoy it, for them to want to do it, for them to do it effectively, for them to do it in a way that enhances the system. And I also have to keep in mind that if they don't want to do it, and if there's something about that whole kind of profession that's just flawed that nobody wants to do, then they have to be compensated more for the fact that they're doing things that nobody wants to do. And they have to, you know, something has to be done for it to be more fair, and it has to be automated and optimized quickly, you know, to make the system more efficient. Because if people are having to do things that they don't want to do, we have to translate them and put them in a position where they get to do things they do want to do, where they could be more effective, where they could really throw their entire spirit and consciousness into the task, which the business thing might not give. But at the same time, I feel like for most people in today's world, that might not necessarily apply. They have sort of, they might have the capacity to have true passion, but maybe they're more interested in just having some sort of comfort, you know, having things, at least for some amount of time, they're interested in just comfort and keeping things sort of solid and keeping things, simple, and just contribute in some way, but have things work and allow and get compensation to work up, you know, their own small little, world of happiness. They pursue their own, you know, at a very sort of local, you know, more simple level. When there's nothing wrong with it. And if they want that kind of, you know, comfort they don't want things to be too interesting. That's perfectly fair. And there's a sense I have to respect the value that has. So yeah, these are just the thoughts basically that I have to that you'd have to weigh, you know, regardless of which profession you want to do, but in terms of deciding which function you need to have and which function you want to have, and how the function that you want to have changes the system, and how it could make the system more unfair, and whether it can make the system, how to prevent it from making the system too unfair. Make sure that the system's fairness is conserved in some way as we pursue different forms of function. Anywho, I think God's general is just like, we don't want things to be too unfair, and we don't want things to be too easy, we don't want things to be too hard, because if they're too easy, then there's no significance in the achievement, and if they're too hard, then the achievement isn't worth it, and it's hopeless. So as always, we're searching for that mythical balance. Anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to say for now. It's a short video. Cheers.